Hi, you're on the edge with me, Max Kaiser, coming to you from sunny downtown Tehran, Iran. Hey, I noticed that the Iranians have just upped their gold supply, their gold reserves, pretty aggressively adding to their gold reserves. They're now in the top 15 countries in the world with major gold reserves. And I think this is a great idea because when I read folks like David Broder, who writes in the Washington Post, he says that the American economy is really doing quite poorly, so let's invade Iran. So here you have, once again, policymakers and pundits in America completely taking the position that human lives in Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, they're expendable. They're only there to serve the American economy, which I find remarkable and quite shameful, I might add. But keep buying gold. That's all I can tell you, because when this dollar collapses, as it most surely will, as every fiat currency and every empire has done before it, you're going to be glad you own the gold. Okay, time now to go to Seattle and talk with Damon Vrabel of CSPER.org, where you can see his video series, Debunking Money, talking about the collapse of the U.S. dollar. Damon Vrabel, your new video series, Debunking Money, tell us about it.
Yeah, I decided I had to do some more education on the money system because as I was writing articles using terms like debt money and asset money, people didn't know what I was talking about. There was just endless confusion out there as far as what I meant by the term asset money. Everybody thought that meant commodity-backed money, and it was a sobering moment where I realized we're in some serious trouble if we don't realize just the accounting difference of a money system that is an asset to a small, tight group of firms and a debt to everything else in the economy versus a money system where you can have some money that's an asset. And then as I started thinking about that and how to explain it, I realized there's a whole other level of information that has to be explained as well, like strategic level perspective on money and the economy, because most people are kind of operating at an operational level or tactical level. They just think kind of day to day about the world we're living in, and they use the way they've been taught in schools or from political camps or whatever to think about strategic level. So the strategic level is defined for most people by schools of thought or political camps. And I realized all of those are basically disinformation as well. So these first few lessons in the series, I've had to do something that I wasn't planning at the beginning, which is to explain the strategic perspective on where we are now. In order to understand where you need to go, you need to know where you are on the map currently. And most of the conventional wisdom out there when it comes to money, I think it's all confusing and designed to confuse people as far as where they are now.
All right. Now, you do a really good job in breaking down the primary political organization structures around the world, let's say capitalism versus communism, and you put these two strains of political thought as connecting arteries into one global money central location. And as you point out, this is not money as in, well, I worked really hard, I made money, I saved some of it, and I put some of that in the bank, and that's the basis of some kind of economic system. No. You're talking about how the central banks flood these various economies with loans, with debt. And this immediately sets up a detrimental situation where everybody is put on the hamster wheel, whether it's communistic hamster wheel or capitalism hamster wheel, to pay off the interest on their debt. Nobody ever gets ahead, but it does serve the people who create this system very, very well. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, I mean, the people that get ahead are the financiers, the people that issue the money, because it goes into the system as an asset to them. It's just like a casino house in Vegas. When everybody walks into the casino house, they have to borrow chips. Well, you can try to get ahead versus the people sitting beside you playing the poker game, but the real person who gets ahead is the casino house itself, because the games are rigged to benefit the house. And that's exactly what happens. And it's not just the central banks, it's the commercial banks that are issuing the money, injecting it into the system. it's all issued as an asset to them. And so you don't really need savings anymore. You know, it used to be where banks were kind of exogenous to the money system, and banks needed people to put money into their vaults, and that was called savings, so the banks could engage in investment. Well, now all money goes into the system as an asset to them. It's already in their vaults, basically. It's an electronic digit vault, but you know, all money starts off as an asset to the bank, which they can then use as investment. As they put people in debt, that's a credit for them to use and inject through governments and corporations to build the empire that they want.
Right. So there is no such thing as private property anymore. For example, in the news today, Wells Fargo just seized somebody's car for lack of payment, even though the car had been 100% paid for. A couple of weeks ago, somebody's house was seized, even though they had paid for the house 100%. The idea of private property no longer exists, and yet you have groups in the United States like this Tea Party movement, which is supposedly lobbying for the benefits of, as Rick Santelli of CNBC would call, an economy where those who carry the water should be benefited instead of those, or not at the expense of those who drink the water. That mythology that there's a meritocracy has been shattered by the existence of one central location of debt-creating global bankers whose only interest is to create debt slavery. Now, at the center of this all, and it's a very good series you have there on the internet, you break it down as a chalkboard series, a whiteboard series, and it's quite...
Very small whiteboard.
Yeah, it's great, and I see you have a nod to the frat boys who run the whole system by wearing your little baseball cap this time, which was a nice touch. Now, let's get into some specifics here. The capital machine, who's in it?
Most people are in it. I mean, the people that are working for it to earn, I mean, the people that are basically serving it because they need to earn bank credit, they are actually participating in it.
Yes, but those are the Ponzi's. Those are the Ponzi's who are just adding more blood in the form of debt at the bottom of the pyramid. But who's at the top of the pyramid? Who is it? The Chamber of Commerce in the United States, the Business Chamber of Commerce, is that the head of the corrupt Ponzi pyramid, the Bernie Madoffication of the U.S. economy? Is it the Council on Foreign Relations? Who's at the head of this ungodly serpent of debt?
Well, it's a quote capitalist system, and so at the top of the pyramid is the biggest capital pools in the world. It's not necessarily American. It's all the capital pools around the world, multi-generational wealth that's hidden in a bunch of LLCs. You see hundreds of them if you just look them up on the Upper East Side of New York. There's endless, XYZ Capital Partners LLC. Those types of firms have and collectively operating together, some of them operate together, and wield their power to allocate capital.
Right. So let's say J.P. Morgan, they've got something like $90 trillion or 5 times the GDP of America on their books in terms of derivatives, which are unregulated, unaccounted for, just weapons of mass financial destruction that they can whip out and fire at anybody at any time.
Right. Yeah, and so the big sell-side banks are some of the most powerful institutions, but even behind them are the senior capital pools. Like you get a glimpse of this in Wall Street too. Oliver Stone's movie, he did a great job of portraying the narcissists that are the CEOs of the banks. But then behind those narcissists are some really old guys walking around with canes, and they are the ones that are watching daddy's money. And that's where a lot of the power comes from. And they use the big sell-side banks to launder their money and gain territory, gain claims on assets, and continue multiplying the wealth that they already have. And that's around the world. I mean, it's in New York, San Francisco, Boston, London, Frankfurt, Tokyo, Paris, Dubai, Hong Kong. And so this really is the financial elite managing countries and people as an asset on their balance sheet.
Now you describe countries around the world, their banking systems are on the verge of collapse. So how did this happen? I mean, is it by design or by accident?
Well, it's endemic to the design of a debt-based monetary system that's controlled by private capital because they're going to demand exponential returns over time and constantly demand increasing debt as they force governments into debt and corporations into more debt and people because they want their returns so they can enjoy their lobster feasts in peace. And as they continue driving exponential returns, and the people do as well. I mean, everybody's in this together because of the way the monetary system's designed. As it grows exponentially, the debt is going to grow to a point where it's unsustainable. And once it reaches the point where the top capital holders think it's not sustainable, they're going to pull their chips off the table. And then that leaves the banks hollow. And the banks will collapse unless the central banks at that point steal from the people and drop the equity and assets from the people, from the lower classes into the banks to keep them alive. Because as long as you're stuck with this monetary system, the banks are the only source of liquidity for the people. So you're kind of hostage to it, and you have to fill their balance sheets with more assets as the top global capital holders pull their assets out.
What I find remarkable is that, as you point out, the debts are growing exponentially. And with labor markets collapsing and job markets collapsing and with GDP collapsing around the world, the ability to service that debt is shrinking. Tax base in countries like Ireland, in Greece, around Europe is collapsing. Austerity measures are obliterating the ability for economies to pay for this debt. And yet the response of policymakers seem not to try to partition off that debt and to wall it off or to ring fence it or to somehow keep it away from the general economy. All the policies we see today seem to be geared toward allowing that exponentially growing virus of debt destruction to get deeper into every single aspect of the economy by taking away all the regulations, by taking away Glass-Steagall, obviously, by taking away now quantitative easing, talked about in the U.S., for example. That's just a matter of the Federal Reserve opening up the Fed's balance sheet to more of the debt virus.
As long as you're stuck with the current monetary system, that's the only option, is to keep trying to expand debt, to keep leveraging the economy. And that's what we witnessed through the last 70 years. We just kept adding new levels of leverage. It started out with something as simple as savings accounts, and then it went to broader M1 and M2 and M3, and then crazy stuff that we've never heard of that actually unbelievably passes for legitimate notions of liquidity in the economy. But until governments wake up and decide to restructure the basis of the monetary system on something that doesn't require or it isn't owned by private capital holders, that's the only option, is to try to increase leverage.
All right, so you say it isn't owned by private capital owners. So the banking system is owned by private industry, private individuals. It doesn't operate as a utility as it should. The banking industry should not be that much different from the electrical grid or the water infrastructure. There should be an option, a public option, if you will, for a bank system that operates as a utility, credit on demand at a reasonable rate for those willing to take reasonable risks.
Right. And that's what I'm amazed at the economics profession. It seems like there's only 2 or 3 economists out there that even get debt finance. Steve Keen is one of them in Australia. Michael Hudson gets even more. He gets the power differential that occurs in this type of monetary system, and he refers to the 2 tiers in feudalism. But even Steve Keen will he knows the math, he gets it, and he even calls the banking system, he analogizes it to a drug pusher. Yet, even after saying that, he still endorses the current model of the system, a privately controlled banking system, controlled by foreign capital holders that aren't even, loyal to a nation state and to the people of a country. So I'm amazed that economists aren't willing to step out of that box and say, I can't imagine anything more worthy of being a utility or more appropriate to be a utility if it's the equivalent of a drug pusher, as Steve Keen brilliantly calls it. I think it's a perfect metaphor.
And Damon Vrabel, I mean, let's look at what's happening in other industries. You've got companies like Monsanto and Synergy who are in the biotechnology industry who are turning seeds into a currency that's debt-backed. So they're turning the neoliberal failure of fractional reserve fiat debt monstrosity, and they're bringing that to big agriculture. They're starving people because they can't afford to buy their debt-based seeds. Or how about in the copyright industry? The copyright cartel is suing everybody for fair use rights of copyrighted material. They're turning copyright into another global debt-backed currency scheme. So this plague of locusts that has brought us debt-backed nothingness and squeezed out actual capital and equity is now working its way in like Matt Taibbi's blood-sucking octopus into every little nook and cranny of every single piece of the entire economy.
Right. It's about power and control, so that everyone has to rent. Most of the people have to rent everything that they need to support their life, whether it's food or money or what have you. And the corporate institutions, we're seeing now the reality of what corporations are. We've had this free market ideology that has unfortunately poisoned people's ability to see the truth. The corporations were founded by royal families. Corporations exist to exert power and control over territories and maintain control over commodities and resources. And now they've grown to the point where they are supranational, multinational, spread across much of the globe. There are some regions of the globe that aren't yet dominated by them. They haven't allowed the Anglo-American financial machine and the multinational corporations to move into their territories, but it's just a matter of time as the system continues growing and establishing control over all the resources and commodities, and therefore the people.
Well, yeah, I think it's interesting that in the United States of America that celebrates the idea of private property more so than anybody else out there in the world, and yet you've got a country now with roughly $14 trillion in debt. You've got unfunded liabilities on Medicaid and Social Security of another 50, 60, or $70 trillion. That means that every man, woman, and child has tens of thousands, upwards of $100,000 worth of debt hanging over their head. And anytime anybody does or says anything that's not in concert with the policies of the government, which tend to lean toward genocide and opportunistic warfare, they simply say, oh, it's time for you to pay this debt, which yesterday you didn't have to pay, but today you do. Doesn't anyone realize that they're basically living with Charles Manson in the White House, whoever it is, Democrat or Republican? They're all psychotic Kool-Aid drinking sociopaths who are going to whip out the sword of debt to decapitate them or decapitalize them whenever it's politically convenient.
Yeah, this is the. I mean, part of the reason I think they are what you're describing is because they're held hostage by the overall capital machine. But this is the civil rights issue of the 21st century. In my view, we're all in it together this time. It's not black versus white, old versus young, male versus female, east versus west, whatever. We're all in it together against the ruling elite class that controls all money and requires everyone else to be in debt in order to have liquidity and live. And the only option in that economic or in that monetary system is to continue increasing people's debt.
That's right. There should be no financialization without representation.
Right. And I don't know. I'm amazed at the power of Huxley's Brave New World. The power of the matrix, the power of the media machine to keep people distracted and confused. Like I'm talking about, like in one of my videos, I'm talking about the most important dynamic for people's future as we move into the 21st century and where things are headed over the next 50 years. And I get like 3,000 views versus, you get a sports star or a rock star on there and they get 20 million views. I'm amazed that people are happy with their debt slavery condition. It's really unbelievable to really ponder the power of the media machine. I talk to people in the Philippines or people in Brazil, people emailing me that have stumbled on my videos and they see it and they're trying to lead movements in their countries because they're feeling the pain of it. Their people are literally starving. because of this monetary system. But in the U.S., we're in this weird matrix where people think their enslavement equals freedom.
Well, let's talk about solutions, if there are any, for a second. Typically, when you have a monolithic monstrosity, sometimes you can throw a spanner into the works. You know, I'm thinking, for example, some people have tried to do this. For example, in Canada, I believe, is where you find that magazine Adbusters, where they come up with interesting ways to re-paper over the images of advertising, to reframe all the advertising to some degree of success, although they don't seem to have really gotten really the kind of traction that one would hope. But anyway, in terms of capital markets and possible solutions, I know you've talked about auditing the Fed or cutting the national debt, but these are pretty big projects that would require political cooperation, which doesn't exist because everyone now in the U.S., especially with this Tea Party movement, is essentially become a black shirt or a brown shirt for the neo-fascist American oligopolies controlled by folks like the Koch brothers. But is there a spanner in the works? Is there a way to kind of hit the soft underbelly and poke the system in the eye? Does this question make sense? And if so, is there an answer? Damon Vrabel.
Yeah, the question makes a ton of sense. I think a lot of us have put a lot of time into thinking about it. And then some economists and monetary reformers, have ideas about how to fix the monetary system. But the reality is we're living in this Machiavellian world of those who have power and those who don't. And people that don't generally aren't even aware of this issue. And the people with it, they're not going to change it. So all these monetary reform ideas, until you get the people to wake up, they're not possible. But I think that's the key. I've mentioned before that spiritual awakening of some sort, I don't mean anything religious necessarily. I just mean an awakening to the reality of our lives and the meaninglessness of our lives right now as we just spin around on the hamster wheel to earn bank credit. That type of awakening is going to have to happen in order to solve this, because none of the monetary reform policies are going to be possible unless people wake up to the reality and the need for it.
All right, Damon Vrabel, thanks so much for being on The Edge.
All right, thanks, guys.
All right, that's going to do it for this edition of On the Edge with Max Kaiser. I want to thank my guest, Damon Vrabel. His website is csper.org, and he's got a great series of videos right now to watch. I highly recommend it. If you want to send me an email, please do so at ontheedge@presstv.com. Until next time, this is Max Kaiser saying bye, y'all.